Good evening, everybody. My name is Paolo, and I'm a product designer at Dropbox. If I get this to start. OK. Do I need a point at the screen? I need a point at the screen to get the slides to go? OK. I'm currently a product designer at Dropbox, but you should know I haven't always been a product designer. I actually have a past as a startup founder, like many of you here. But you should know I wasn't a really good startup founder. I was actually a very unsuccessful one. But that's OK. What I've done is I've packaged learnings from my failure as a startup founder and from working within growth and product teams at companies like Strava, the fitness app, and Dropbox. And I come to you tonight with a framework or a series of recommendations how you can run experiments in a more thoughtful and strategic way. Sorry. OK. So what we're going to be talking about. So first, as a growth designer, I want to introduce you to growth design. I'll be talking a little bit about what it is, what we do, and why it's important for your business. Second, we're going to be talking about some frameworks that you can apply at your own company. You don't have to be a designer. If you're a product owner, if you're an engineer, these might be useful for you too. And third, we're going to see a real-life application of this framework at a project that I worked with in the past. And you'll see how it applies to a real experiment. So first, what is growth design? Well, it's a way of designing products, obviously, that is empirical. It's characterized by a lot of observation. You'll launch, you'll iterate, you'll learn a lot, and then you'll incorporate those learnings in the next phase. And the beauty of this is it allows you to move really quickly. It allows you to expedite learning, move at speed. So you might be asking, why is growth design important? Well, like I said, it allows you to move quick and to learn while you're moving, which is important, and to pivot. You can manage risk better. By iterating often, if you find there's something not working, it's quicker for you to change direction. And this is very helpful for your business. And last but not least, it allows you to tie user value to your business needs. Often if you show your users unrealized value, they will go to great length to obtain that value. And that translates to moving business metrics. So how can we design for growth? Through some frameworks, which I'm going to share with you. First, we're going to understand, how do you define your North Star? And I know you've heard a lot about North Stars tonight. Everybody else on here before me spoke about North Stars. Sean spoke about North Star metrics. So I'll give you my interpretation of North Star and how it's helpful as a designer. Second, we're going to understand the space we're operating in. Often, if you're an early stage company or you're working within growth at a larger company, the space is very ambiguous, so it's important you can form a strong point of view and form hypotheses, which then we're going to see how you can validate or invalidate in our third phase of exploration. And fourth, we're going to see how you can build a balanced portfolio, a balanced roadmap of experiments that build on top of each other to get you to that North Star. So first, defining your North Star. As I said, you've heard a lot about North Stars tonight, and I'll give you my interpretation. Well, I think a North Star... Sorry, I have problems with the clicker. I think North Stars are important. If you don't have a North Star, you might feel like this bird. Your head's underground, you don't really know where you're going, and as a result, your design decisions aren't that impactful. They're less intentional. And as a result of that, the experiments aren't going to have a clear direction. But on the flip side, if you do have a North Star, your design decisions will generate an impact, a measurable impact. And as a consequence of that, the experiments you design will have a clear direction. So for me, a North Star is a general direction of where you're trying to go, whether it's an experiment or a project. And it's important you understand there are specific user actions that your customers, your users, can take in the product. These actions are clear and measurable, and they roll back into the North Star. So an example of that, in a project I might work on, if my North Star is growing a specific segment of users, different actions I can have these users take might be sign up, the more obvious one, starting a trial, or perhaps for existing users, I can use them as a catalyst to bring new people in through invites and referrals. So how do we actually reach that North Star, that goal? Let's go back 2,000 years. Archimedes taught us that with a lever, you can lift the world. So I have an interpretation of what a lever is. It's something you and your team can push on to impact that metric. And as a result, you'll amplify the impact you have on that metric. And I realize this can feel a little abstract, so I'm going to show some examples of what I intend when I mean lever. So, first of all, show of hands, who joined Dropbox through an invite or invited someone to get a little more free space? Okay. Not surprising. That's usually what people say. So you're familiar with, a few years ago, a great way for Dropbox to grow its early user base was to give away some free space. The person joining will get some free space in exchange. And it makes a lot of sense, because the core value of the product at that time was space. So you're getting a very valuable thing by taking this action. So our North Star, in that case, if we reapply this framework, could be to grow the user base, and we would measure success in terms of sign-up rate. Our lever here are double-sided referrals, which means as an existing user, I get a little more space, which is a strong value prop. And you, by joining, not only join, but you get a little more space too. So we're both getting something out of this. The outcome of this, obviously, is an increase in volume of referrals. But as a result of increasing referrals, you also have an increase in new signups, new people joining. And it's important because you're pouring them back at the top of the funnel. So at this point, what you've done is you've created a self-sustained growth engine. More people will come in, more people will enact that same loop and bring other people in. And a lot of the stuff I'm going to talk to you about and show you in my case study is going to be similar to this. So this leads us to our next step of the framework. And it's understanding the space, forming a point of view, and forming some hypotheses that you'll go out and test. Working in growth, I often find myself in situations like this. You're at the beginning of a project, there's a lot of ambiguity, you don't really know where to start, and as a former startup founder, I can empathize with you. I felt the same way when starting my own company. So the question is, how can we find direction? Well, I think a very effective tool that I've used at my company is the known knowns matrix. It's also known as the Johari window from the psychologist that theorized it in the 50s, or the Rumsfeld matrix from Donald Rumsfeld, former Secretary of Defense under Bush. So let's see what that is. Well, I realize the text is a little blurred there, but it's pretty much a matrix divided in 4 quadrants. And your goal is to get top left in the context quadrant. But depending on the company size you're at, if it's a larger established company, you might be in the bottom left quadrant, where the green text is. And you're sitting on existing data from past experiments, quantitative data, or qualitative data from past user research. Or you might be in a groundbreaking field, and you're starting a new product from scratch, and you might find yourself on the bottom right, where those question marks are, in the unknown unknowns. Everything is unknown. What you want to do is you want to reach the top left corner, context. You want to turn those unknowns into known knowns. And how can you do this? Obviously, you can do it through research, speaking to your users, which I encourage you to do. But you can also do it through experiments. And being a growth designer, I'll talk to you about that specifically today. And like I said, the ultimate goal is to move up and to the left, mapping out things you don't know, things you didn't know you knew, you had them in your company, mapping all these out, helping you form hypotheses, and then going out and testing these hypotheses. So I realize the screen is a little hard to read, so fortunately I put it out on a timeline, and I simplified it a little bit. In the first step, we want to understand the space. Bottom left quadrant, bottom right quadrant. The goal here is to form a strong point of view. You want to become an expert of that space. You want to know where gaps are, what users are doing, what are specific patterns you're seeing, either in user behavior, in the data, if you have it. And you want to identify those levers. The levers I'm talking about is similar to the free space when you were joining Dropbox. It's something extremely valuable for the user that is unrealized, that they don't have yet, but that they will go to great lengths to achieve, perhaps signing up or paying you. Next, you want to define what you want to learn when you form that strong point of view. So what this means is forming some hypotheses. We won't go into the detail of that, but you want to make sure your hypotheses are testable in the product. And then you want to define how you're going to learn. And what this means is possibly working with your designers if you have them and understanding what are some design solutions that will help us learn that hypothesis? And obviously, we talked about a North Star, we talked about design being impactful through experiments. You want to make sure that the design of the experiments helps you validate that hypothesis. They have to be strictly connected. And obviously, the outcome is going to be launching experiments. Dual outcome. From a qualitative perspective, you're going to learn a lot about your users at scale. Imagine instead of me putting my product in front of one person at a coffee shop and watching them use it, now I have, depending on your user base, tens of thousands, millions, or hundreds of people using it. So this is great. This is one-on-one interaction with your product at massive scale. And that hopefully is going to also impact your metrics. The beauty of this is you can rinse and repeat. You'll probably form other hypotheses after you've gotten those qualitative learnings and you've impacted the metrics, and you'll start all over again. And you can repeat this to the infinite. Which leads us to our third phase: explore, validate the hypotheses, and expand. This gentleman was my great-grandfather. As you can see, this picture was taken a little over 100 years ago in Pennsylvania. He was in the oil drilling business. And I know a lot of you might be thinking, well, it's 100 years after that. We're talking about growing products fast. Why are we seeing an old picture of a man standing in a field with oil rigs behind him? And you might be right. But what I've noticed is the approach that he was using is very similar to the one of a growth product designer or an entrepreneur. He started out very poor with very little money. And I think he had a gut feeling that there was some oil on this plot of land, and he was able to in some way get enough money to buy that plot of land. He bought it, and he started digging with the tools he had, some of these very rudimental rigs. And he found oil. He found oil. So then he had oil at that point, and what he did is he found a business partner that could fund him and bring in the money. And what he did then, he invested more, and he built rigs that were 3 stories tall. We don't see them here. And why I'm telling you this story is, as a product designer working within growth and as startup founders, I think you can benefit from doing a similar thing. You'll have your pickaxe and your shovel, similar to my great-grandfather, in that first plot of land, and you're going to explore. He explored in a cost-effective way because he had an assumption. He tested it. He actually ended up finding oil, raising more money, and he became a millionaire. He lost it all in 1929. That leads us to the expansion phase. He raised money and started building oil rigs. What you want to do, your oil rig, is going to be to invest more resources. What that means is whether it's design resources or engineering resources or marketing. And I realize this is somewhat high level, so I want to show some practical examples of what this means for a designer. So in your first phase of exploration, you want to validate some internal working hypotheses you have before even writing a line of code. And what this means is you can do it with speaking to your users. You don't have to be a researcher. All you need is a prototype. It could be a paper prototype, it could be a click-through prototype, it doesn't matter. What you want to do is you want to sit down with your customers and you want to speak to them first, you want to understand, before even writing a line of code. See, we're in the explore phase. We're trying to keep things cost-effective. This might be a no-brainer, but you want to experiment on areas of the product that are highly trafficked. The reason is you don't want an experiment to run 6 months, 8 months, because it takes too long to reach statistical significance. So try focusing on those areas that already are getting a lot of traffic. And you might say, well, what if I don't have a lot of traffic? Then maybe you want to start driving traffic there before running the experiment. So it's a supply thing. Single platform. The reason I bring this up is I've been at smaller companies where we were bootstrapped for resources, and my own company. And what we might do is, instead of starting iOS, Android, desktop, web, we started out with one platform. And this was mainly due to engineering resources. But it's interesting because you can start on one platform and learn from there and then propagate out to all the other platforms. As a designer, we have a tendency of thinking up new patterns, new components. I usually invite designers to think about the components they already have and try working with those. If a new component won't directly impact the outcome of the experiment, then there's no need to design something new. Use what you have, use existing libraries. It'll save you a lot of time for engineering and for design and documentation. Hold off on localization Similar to the second bullet point, try to optimize. You might be working on an area with the most traffic and combine it with a geo where you have the most users, which might be English, but might be another language. Often localization is a costly process. Depending on your resources, you have to potentially hire vendors, hire translators. There's always bugs, you have to do QA. Try going with one language now. Most traffic surfaces, one language, one platform. Copy is the interface. What I mean by this is the language you use in the explore phase could make or break your experiment. A label that isn't entirely clear or is misleading will break an experiment. You will get the learnings that you weren't supposed to get, probably, if you weren't being clear. So what is important here when I say copy is the interface, your product should work even if it didn't have colors, shapes, icons. If the words are there, users know what to do, they understand it. So make sure that copy is bulletproof, it's airtight. Now we move into the expand phase. So this is the most fun phase from a design perspective. We can start improving and personalizing the UX. And what that means is perhaps you have different customer segments. So you might cater to different segments. The language might change for each. The imagery might change. The UX actually might change. The actions they should take to engage with your product might change based on the type of customer they are. And now you can go back and design for edge cases. One thing I didn't mention, you might jump over edge cases in the first phase when you're exploring because you're a little more lean. And by edge cases, I mean those small things that maybe a small percentage of users would see, or a button doesn't truncate properly, the text doesn't wrap around properly. So you can go back to that. It's important you do address design and UX edge cases because you might find yourself with design debt further down along the line, similar to code debt. And then remember I mentioned you focus on one platform. Now is the time to expand into all the other platforms. Now, it depends on the platform you started with. The learnings you'll get on the others might be different. Something that performs in a specific way on Android is not going to perform identically on iOS. And the reason for this, from what I've seen, is we have different market penetration based on devices, and users in different countries use different devices. So again, it's not an apples to apples comparison, but it's a good way of going about it. Now you want to go in and design custom components if you withheld on that phase. And then you can go in and localize. If you're focusing on one language, on one country, now's the time to spend that money on translators and localize your product. And then polish. What I mean by that is, as a designer, I really appreciate delight. We call it cupcake at Dropbox. Delight is those things in your product that you don't expect that make it different from your competitor. And think about that. It could be micro interactions, custom illustrations, or typography. Sorry, iconography. So this leads us to our fourth phase, building an experiments roadmap. Or I prefer to refer to it as building a portfolio of experiments. And we'll see why. So we've been talking about drilling and breaking the earth to find value, so I want to keep talking about rocks. And I bring to you pebbles. What I think pebbles are small, isolated experiments. And the reason for this is, if you embrace the explore phase too much, if you spend too much time in the explore phase and never move on to the expand phase, you risk finding yourself with a product littered with small experiments. And the problem with pebbles, they're great for initial learnings, they're cost effective, they will get you results, and often very big results. But it's marginal change over time. You'll never see that step change. If you're trying to move from 0 to 1, you might not get that with pebble experiments from explore phase. You might move from 0 to 0.1, 0.12, 0.13, but never a large leap. So this leads me to present to you the quality learning ratio. It's not scientific, I made it up, so take it for what it is. But from past experience, I've found that you often get out of it what you put into it. And this is a cautionary tale that I'm going to show with you, and the reason for showing this, it's an exaggeration, so caveat, keep in mind this is an exaggeration just for illustrative purposes. But I want to share this with you to explain what might happen if you jump from an explore phase to an expand phase without too much context. So Let's imagine we're at the headquarters of a ride-sharing company. And the product team is getting together, and they're talking about strategy. They want to branch out and grow. So someone says, well, we've heard from research that people want to get from A to B in alternative ways that are quicker during rush hour. They don't want to be in the traffic. So an idea comes up. Well, what if we gauge that interest for different types of vehicles through some simple tests? This is the explore phase, remember? We want to do small tests to understand if there's opportunity before we go in and invest more, which makes a lot of sense. And I agree with this person. It'll allow us to learn in a cheap and cost-effective way before investing more. This makes a lot of sense. So the team goes out, the designers go to the drawing board, design a solution for this test. The engineers go out and build it, and the test is launched. So fast forward a few weeks. And now imagine I'm a user in the test. I'm seeing that experiment. So I walk out of work one day, and it's my anniversary, which today is actually my anniversary. And I'm trying to get on the other side of town because I made a reservation at a really nice restaurant. It's costing me a lot of money, and I need to be there in 10 minutes. If I'm not there in time, we're going to lose the table. And this is what I see when I walk out of work. Probably familiar with this. It's rush hour. So I pull out my phone, I open my ride-sharing app, 25 minutes to get to the other side of town. That's crazy. I'm going to lose my table. My wife is not going to be happy. This is going to be bad. So all of a sudden, instead, a pop-up appears. Avoid traffic. That's a strong value prop. It's contextual. I'm in the middle of rush hour. And it tells me I can get to this place a lot faster. Plus, it's with a jetpack. So who doesn't want to try a jetpack, right? Show up at a dinner with a red jetpack? I would do that. So I tap into it. Not available. Coming soon. As a user, I'm very disappointed. I lost some time. Now I'm even more late. What am I going to do? Run? So I'll let you know how it goes. I don't know if I get there on time. We'll see. This is next week. But the team gets back together. A few weeks go by. The experiment runs for 2 weeks. Statistical significance is reached. And the results are in. It performed really well. That pop-up, 99.9% click-through rate, and you know that's a lot. So, money. Yes, people want jetpacks. They showed us. They clicked through. They were interested. It was contextual. It makes sense. It's a strong value prop. Let's go out and do this. Let's build a fleet of jetpacks, which I would assume would cost a lot of money. So it's really not cost-effective. So, what's wrong with this? Well, the experiment quality was low, and as a result, the learning is blurred. So we were talking about you often get out of it what you put into it. This is a good explanation of that. So what happened in the story that I just told you, we started out with a pebble. We were in the explore phase, and it makes a lot of sense. We talked about pebbles in the explore phase. But what the team is doing, they're building a boulder on top of the pebble. And that's a bad decision. So I want to talk about how can we be a little more thoughtful when doing growth and experimenting. Shouldn't surprise you, let's mix boulders and pebbles. We're trying to get up to that North Star. If we mix them, we'll be able to create value by stacking them one on top of the other and getting up there versus going from small to big all of a sudden. And by mixing them, you always have confidence that you can move on to the next stage. So, from some personal experience, what happens if you only do pebbles? Some good things, some not so good things. Like I said, marginal changes. You'll see marginal results. It'll be hard to have that big leap and see those big results. And it's actually going to be harder to get your users to behave differently with a product. They might click on something more, but they're not going to take meaningful actions that mean your business will benefit that much. If you manage a team, engineers, designers, product managers, these kind of experiments are great, but they're not good if it's the only one. So you could try crop rotation, moving people around, but long term, they're going to affect the team morale. They're not that exciting. They give good results, but they're not exciting to build out. So be thoughtful about how you have your team work on these and in which balance. And lastly, you are going to see some gains initially, but they might wane off over time. They might be short-term gains. Now, on the flip side, if you focus on boulders only, you can expect the opposite might happen. It'll take a lot to get those learnings, and we talked about growth design is moving quick, getting learnings, expedite learning. Only boulders are not going to get you those learnings very often, and that confidence you'll have at longer intervals of time, and the results are going to be delayed. It takes longer to design and build, pretty obvious. The market may shift while you're building. If it takes you a year to build a feature, someone might get to it before you, and it's going to be too hard to steer the ship to pivot at that point. You cannot pivot quickly. So whatever works for you, try to balance pebbles and boulders. Try not to over-index on one or the other. The reasons are the ones I just told you. Try to balance them out. Whatever works for you. They don't have to be equal ratio, but try to stack them up together in a way that your team is always engaged and feeling motivated. So we talked about understanding the space you're in, forming a point of view, forming hypotheses, testing these hypotheses, and exploring. I realize some of it is high level, so I want to show you a real-life application of it. We're going to see how you can define your North Star. We're going to see how you can understand the space, form hypotheses. Then I'm going to show you some examples of an exploration experiment and how that led to an expansion phase. And we're going to see how all of these together make a stronger portfolio of products. As I mentioned, I used to work at a company called Strava. Show of hands, how many people know Strava? Wow, that's a lot. Okay. I used to be an avid cyclist. I worked at Strava, and I loved it. I worked on a feature called activity tagging, which you may have used yourself. Our North Star was growing the user base. It was an acquisition project. But there was an interesting twist to it. Obviously, we were measuring signups, acquisition, but the lever we chose to push or pull were those interactions that happen in real life with athletes. If an athlete is out running or cycling with someone else, it's a strong interaction, it's a strong moment, and we can leverage that to bring someone else into the product if they're not there yet. So just a little bit of context. Sports are social. We know people work out in groups, and we know people work out and they're not all using our product, because otherwise we would have saturation. And additionally, word of mouth is very strong. A lot of people are joining through word of mouth already, organically. So the problem we had, existing athletes couldn't add someone else that hadn't recorded with them. There was no way. So for example, if I go running with a friend and I record it, but they didn't, I can't add them after. They don't have the memory of that activity, which was a problem. And we knew this was a problem from talking to our athletes. So we started forming some hypotheses. Like I said, we did a little bit of research. We reached out to customers, talked to customer support. This was a big thing we found. And we found that athletes actually wanted to add friends. They were going on activities with other people. They wanted to celebrate these activities and these accomplishments with these friends, but these friends weren't there and they couldn't add them after. And the other hypothesis we had that if someone is not using Strava, the value of that activity, of that memory with someone they went for a run or a ride with is strong enough to bring them in, to convert them, versus just a generic, hey, I'm using this app, want to join? So what we did in the explore phase, on one platform, Android, we built a cell test. On the activity detail, I'm sorry you can't read that, but it says, invite others. We built this test, and what we wanted to learn was, is there opportunity here? Is what we're seeing from a qualitative perspective, speaking to our users, are they showing us the same behavior in the data? If we prompt someone to invite someone else that they were on with that activity, will they actually do it? And what we were measuring here was naturally the volume of outbound invites from the existing athletes, but also the signups that derived from this. Remember, we're talking about growing the user base. So we ran this test for 2 weeks, English only. And what we learned is people actually wanted to add people they had gone out for a run or ride, and given the opportunity to do it, they would do it. They actually engaged with it a lot. And this confirmed things we had seen in research. So it was great. We mapped research and data, and we found the two things actually confirmed one or the other. For people that aren't yet on Strava, we actually confirmed that receiving an invite to be added to an activity was more valuable than a generic invite. So people were converting more when being added to an activity. So this gave us confidence to move into the next phase, which is the expand phase, remember? We're going out, we validated, now we're building those rigs, we're spending a little more money there, a little more time, and we're branching out. So what we did, we built functionality to add people that were already on Strava. We started out with people that weren't there with you. Now we expanded out to people that are already on the product but weren't there with you. And why this is important, the first one is acquisition, bringing new people in. This is great for re-engagement. If I already have the product and now I'm getting added, I get notified. Perhaps I dropped off, I churned, I wasn't looking at the product. Not only I get notified, I come back in and I have a valuable piece of content. And my friends will start kudoing it, giving me a kudo, a like. I might get comments. I'll come back again. And now that'll get me to be a little more active with the app again. And then since we are in the expand phase, we talked about platform parity, we moved out into web. We built the same feature on web. And then on iOS, we started on Android. And then we realized, well, we have a lot of people that are coming in and we're pushing them to the App Store. What can we do to improve their experience, the new user experience? So we built an experience for them. They were able to see a little more about that activity you just got added at without going to the store. So we removed a barrier to entry, which was the app install, by showing them unrealized value, remember? Which now is in sight. So they're more willing to confirm to get access to it, to obtain it. So that's all I have. If there's one thing I want you to take away from this talk, I think it's summed up really well in this quote. Not launching, painful, but not learning, fatal. Thank you. Yep.
Thank you very much. We only have time for one question, and I chose the first one which popped in, which is, just a second. Okay, so how does one shift from an engineering career to a career in product design?
Ooh. I'm not sure I know the answer to that. I think if you're an engineer, you're already very close to building product, and you can get a little closer by understanding what are the solutions you're building, why, go to the root cause, what are the problems you're trying to solve. If you're working with designers, start spending more time with them, ask them, what is the design process like? There's a ton of resources in terms of books, online webinars, boot camps you can go to, but I would say if you're already an engineer at a company that either has designers or doesn't have designers, get closer to your users. Start getting closer to the users. Start understanding what they're Start understanding what your users are experiencing, what are the problems, get in their shoes, walk a mile in their shoes. And I think if you can start empathizing with the people you're building a product for, designing is just going to be a matter of execution. Understand what are the problems, understand how they're feeling. You can learn the craft part, the different software we use, how to use components, patterns and whatnot, but start talking to people. I think design is a lot about talking to people.
Thank you, Paolo.
Thank
you
you
very much. And
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you.